Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the California ISO, I'd like to welcome you to the Capacity Procurement Mechanism Enhancements Track 2 Stakeholder Workshop. My name is Caitlin McGee, representing the Stakeholder Affairs Group here at the ISO, and I'll be facilitating today's meeting. I'm also joined by CB Hall, our Senior Policy Developer, Abdul Muhammad Ali, our Operations Engineering Resource Adequacy Lead, and Partha Malvadkar, our Principal Resource Adequacy. And we're also joined by Brian Neff from the California Energy Commission today. As a reminder, the presentation and agenda for this meeting will be posted to the Policy and Initiatives webpage under the Stay Informed tab. You should see it posted there later this afternoon. Next slide, please. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping reminders. This call is being recorded for informational and convenience purposes only. Any related transcriptions should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. We will pause throughout the presentation. You're able to ask questions or comments. We do ask that those are kept professional and respectful. If you do need technical assistance today during the webinar, you can send a chat to the event producer. Next slide, please. So there's a few ways you can ask questions or make comments today. If you're connected through the WebEx platform using the audio option, you can click the raise hand icon in the bottom right corner just above the chat window. You can also type in your question into the chat and I'll read it aloud for you. And if you've joined us through the phone only line, you can press #2 and that'll add you to the queue to make your comment. When you are making your comment or question, please remember to state your name and affiliation. And if at any time throughout today's meeting you have any questions, feel free to send them to me, Caitlin McGee, or to all panelists. Next slide, please. So today's agenda, we do have time allotted until 4 p.m. today. We might have some extra time to ask questions or have some discussion, but today we are going to start with introductory remarks from Partha. Abdul will give some background on CPM. CB will be talking about an update on the soft offer cap, and we'll have a quick break today at 2 p.m. And then Brian will be giving us a presentation on the fixed cost outputs from the CEC, and CB will kind of close it out with our Track 2 proposed scope and schedule, and I'll just briefly close today's meeting with our next steps. Next slide, please. And then here is just a brief overview of the CAISO policy initiative stakeholder process. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this. This image here is showing where we are today with CPM Track 2. We're at the very beginning, just kicking off with this workshop today. Next slide, please. So I'll hand it over to Partha to take us through the introductory remarks.
And maybe I suggest why don't we go to the next slide, and we can maybe discuss a little bit about the scope, and maybe CB, can I kick you off to you for maybe the first couple of bullets, and maybe I can weigh in just in terms of that last bullet as well.
Perfect. That sounds great. Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, thanks a lot for taking the time this afternoon. We're here to kind of launch the Track 2 component of our CPM Enhancements initiative, and for those of you that were part of Track 1, thanks a lot for all the comments and feedback and recommendations on Track 1. So for Track 2, the main driver, I would say, of Track 2 is to focus on the soft offer cap. We have a tariff requirement to examine the soft offer cap every 4 years at the latest to see if a change to the soft offer cap is warranted. And the last time we opened a stakeholder initiative on this topic was May 2019. So here we are 4 years later, and we are launching a stakeholder initiative, Track 2, to focus on the soft offer cap. So there's a tariff requirement, but it's also just by itself, it's a good thing to do. There's been a number of changes on the grid throughout the West over the last 4 years. So yeah, we're looking forward to working with all of you. And in terms of this last bullet, I'm gonna give this over to Partha because we are thinking about subsequent changes in CPM and RA in initiatives in the future. So I'll let Partha kind of talk more about that one. Thanks, Partha.
Yeah, no, thanks, CB. So yeah, so I think in terms of the scope, which CB will be discussing in greater detail later in the presentation, I really want to emphasize this initiative isn't the last time stakeholders will have the opportunity to discuss CPM and related reforms at CAISO. So, I mean, just as a context, based on stakeholder feedback and as well as our own internal analysis, we really recognize that there are a number of interrelated issues that the CAISO will need to explore in terms of altering RA processes, particularly in light of the changing resource mix, the various regulatory structural changes that are going along, supply availability and performance concerns, as well as the tightening of the RA market throughout California and the West. And so CAISO's backstop process and roles, including the role of the CPM, will really need to be reviewed comprehensively, to make sure, that our processes continue to achieve, our reliability needs and the policy objectives that we're trying to achieve. I'd also note that the CPM topic, will likely come up with respect to the, in the context of the CPUC slice a day. We're looking to schedule some workshops related to discuss and get feedback on how our processes and systems can still function effectively in light of those changes. But really for the sake of this initiative, we're clearly trying to keep this the scope narrow, but I really wanted to emphasize we recognize the need for a more comprehensive look to RA reforms that will be coming in subsequent initiatives. So yeah, just wanted to give that context, and yeah, thank you. Really appreciate everybody joining today.
Okay. Oh, yeah. I think so. I guess we'll go to the next slide, Silas. Thank you. And we'll turn it over to Abdul to give us some background. Thanks, Abdul.
Thanks, Stevie. Good afternoon, everyone. I just want to make sure I thought my Matthew's hand up. Was that an accident, or is there a question about the introductory remarks here?
I don't see any questions at this time, but maybe we'll give it a few more seconds, see if anybody wanted to raise their hand or drop their question in the chat. All right, I'm seeing that.
Okay. All right, thank you. Next slide, please. So I'll start with some background. This is about the existing CPM process, the background about the CPM process, the CSP process, and hopefully just kind of refresher for everyone to kind of get into the policy change here. So a background on the capacity procurement mechanism, or CPM. This is a process that we use here at the CAISO to cure any deficiencies or potential reliability concerns that are related. Most directly, if I have a deficiency in one of the RA types or RA timeframes, then this is where we use our may exercise backstop mechanism. The key thing here is, one is we're not required, even if there is a deficiency, we have the flexibility to determine if we should exercise backstop or not. And then a key thing I think that we're trying to emphasize here as well is this is an after the fact kind of procurement program. This is typically we wait for the RA program to finish its procurement and showings, and then if there is a deficiency, we use that as a cure option. It is not intended to kind of upfront the RA program or kind of do any kind of procurement ahead of the RA program. So that's the intent of the program and its kind of definition. It's also worth noting that if there's existing RA capacity or RMR capacity or RMR resources under RMR contracts, those are not eligible for CPM designation. So we don't use those. Obviously, we don't develop it in capacity that's already have been procured to meet reliability. Once we do a designation and we get capacity under the CPM procurement, then that capacity is treated like RA when it comes to obligations. So that capacity has to offer to the CAISO markets, make itself available for customer dispatch, and subject to all the RAIM, RA availability incentive mechanism, penalties / incentives, and obviously that substitution rule. So all the RA rules essentially apply to that capacity once we procure it. And then the pool that we get that capacity from is offered to the CAISO voluntarily by the SCs using something we call the competitive solicitation process. And in a couple slides, I'll talk more about that, but that's what feeds, that's an offer kind of platform, or supposed to be the offer platform for CPM capacity for the CAISO to evaluate and designate. Next slide, please. All right, so there's six different types of CPM that we have. I'll go over them briefly. The first one is insufficient local capacity resources in an annual or monthly showings. So this assessment is done in the year ahead and month ahead showing after the cure period is done. If there is still deficiencies, aggregated deficiencies at the CAISO level by TAC in each of the local TAC areas, then the CAISO may exercise backstop procurement and buy some additional resources in those local TACs to cover those deficiencies in the annual and monthly timeframes. We have another type of local deficiency, which is called the collective deficiency in a local capacity area resources. This one is more associated with the local capacity technical study. The criteria in that study determines what resources that we need and the criteria that we need to meet the local reliability needs in those local areas. Based on that criteria, if we are still missing some resources that are needed to meet the local study capacity criteria, then we may exercise, again, that CPM backstop if not cured by the LSCs and procure additional capacity. And then the third type is what we're calling, or the tariff calls, insufficient RA resources shown in a load serving entity's annual or monthly plan. This is basically the system obligation. Do we have sufficient system capacity to meet the aggregated CAISO system targets? So basically the CEC forecast plus PRM minus any applicable credits. That target is what we look at. We compare all the shown system capacity to that target and determine if we have a deficiency or not. And after the cure period is over, we may exercise CPM authority. The fourth one is a CPM significant event, and that's kind of well, let me go 6, and then I'll go to the 4 and 5. So 6 is a cumulative deficiency in the flexible capacity in the annual or monthly plans. This is basically, again, we have the flex RA targets in the annual monthly plan. On a CAISO aggregated level, did we get enough flexible capacity in those monthly and annual showings? If we don't and it's not cured, then the CAISO might backstop and procure additional flexible capacity. Those types that I talked about are directly related to a deficiency in the showings. The deficiency in the showings meeting RA targets. 4 and 5 are what we call intra-monthly CPM types, and they're more related to reliability issues that needs to be addressed that the RA program couldn't address. The CPM, significant event type, is actually quite flexible. It has multiple criteria. So I'm just going to read the tariff definition of it, so I don't make up my own understanding. So let's read it. So the tariff definition is basically a significant event CPM is a substantial event or a combination of events that is determined by the CAISO to either result in a material difference from what was assumed in the resource adequacy program, the purpose of determining the resource adequacy capacity requirements, or produce a material change in system conditions or in CAISO controlled grid operations that causes or threatens to cause a failure to meet the reliability criteria absent the recurring use of non-resource adequacy resources on a prospective basis. So I read this because it's quite a definition, quite a mouthful, and whenever we're determining if we need a significant event, there's a lot of discussions internally with management and legal and even coordination with other entities to determine if we have a need to declare a significant event CPM. This has been that, and the ED CPM has been the most popular ones in the past year, so that would give a little bit more focus. Number 5 is a reliability or operational need that resulted in a CAISO exceptional dispatching capacity that is non-RA or RMR, which means we had to offer a CPM need. So basically, if we have a system or a local need in real-time operations that results in the need to exceptionally dispatch capacity that has not been procured as RA or RMR or one of the types of CPM, basically capacity that's not under contract under one of these types of contracts, RA, CPM, or RMR, and we dip into that capacity, then we offer them CPM designation. Those 4 and 5 are typically 30-day term and can be, significant events can be extended to another 60 days. The ED CPM is 30 days for system needs, 60 days for a local need. The other types are, if they're year ahead or annual, then they could be 1 month up to a full year. So these are the kind of the terms of those CPMs. And then next slide, please. All right. Now, like I said, the tool that we theoretically are expected to use or we're designed to use are the resources that are offered into what we call the competitive solicitation process. Basically, that's a process where scheduling coordinators of resources can voluntarily offer into this process, offer their capacity for the CAISO to use if a CPM need occurs. There's types of or timeframes or types, I guess, of CSP offers. They're annual, monthly, intramonthly. The offers can be anywhere from $0 to $6.31 per kilowatt month. That number is the topic of our discussion here. This is what we call the soft offer cap, which is the limit of how much those bids can go up to. CSP bids or offers can go up to that cap, and this is what we're looking at in today's stakeholder process. The cap is supposed to serve as a safe harbor for resource providing offers, as well as a mitigation from resources exercising market power. And then it's also supposed to be high enough to cover going forward costs for marginal resources. Again, this is kind of the intent. Where are we in meeting that? That's probably something that we can discuss in assessing that soft offer cap today and reevaluating it. And then I think it's worthwhile to mention that the soft offer cap is the kind of default limit per hour tariff. However, resources can submit requests to FERC with justifying the cost that would need to have their offers higher than or exceed the soft offer cap. if that goes through FERC and if FERC approves it, then we honor that rate. If it's whatever that FERC approves, we would honor it in going above the soft offer cap. One more slide, please, and then I'll open it to questions. If I can go to the next slide, please. Okay. So where is it used? I think it's useful to know where we use this. You know, like I said, it's used for capping. The CSP offers have the most common thing. We thought it's worth noting for participants that there's also used to set the RAIM price, the RA availability incentive mechanism. The RAIM process is what we use to incentivize and penalize resources for performing or lack of performance in the RA process. The RAIN price is set at 60% of the soft offer cap. So it's worth noting that when we change, if this results in a change in this initiative in the offer cap, this is where you'll see the impact here. And I think that was the last slide. So I'll open it for questions about the background, and then we can go to the next segment.
All right, Silas, are there any questions on the audio only line?
No, we have no hands up in the queue at this time.
All right.
All right, and for our attendees.
Either they went to sleep because I kept talking too much, or maybe it was a pretty decent explanation. All right. Nice to see you, I guess. Back to you.
Perfect. No, Abdul, thank you very much. That was great. Yeah, I'm not seeing any questions either. So, Silas, if we can go to the next section, that would be great. Okay. We are now going to talk about considering an update to the soft offer cap. So if we can go to the next slide. Okay, great. So the first place I'd like to start is really our tariff, because our tariff does provide specific guidance for how we should consider updating the soft offer cap. So these 4 bullets here are pulled directly from the tariff. And I know it's a little tedious, but I'm just going to go through them because that's where we need to start. So first bullet, the stakeholder process shall consider whether the CPM soft offer cap adequately reflects 120% of the levelized going forward fixed costs of the reference resource at the time of the stakeholder initiative. Next bullet, the basis of such consideration shall be the final results from the CEC cost of generation study and model. And then you can see here, the reference resource shall be a merchant constructed mid-cost 550 megawatt combined cycle resource with duct firing or similar advanced combined cycle resource. And then this last bullet, the stakeholder process also may consider, but not automatically reassess, either what resource serves as the reference resource, the components of fixed costs that are considered in setting the soft offer cap, or the use of a 20% adder. So yeah, so this is the tariff guidance. And so in a nutshell, you basically look at the going forward fixed costs of a combined cycle unit. You add those components up and you multiply by 120%. So if we can go to the next slide, Silas. Okay, and so that is indeed exactly how the current soft offer cap was calculated. And Brian will touch more on this in his section, so you'll see a lot of the same structure when we get to Brian's section. But back in 2014, the soft offer cap was calculated, again, using a 550 megawatt combined cycle resource. If you look here, you can at this table, you can see the 3 specific components of the going forward fixed costs, which are insurance, ad valorem taxes, and fixed O&M, with fixed O&M being the largest of the 3 components. You sum those up, multiply by 120%, and that gets you the 75.67 per kilowatt year that and you take that divided by 12 if you want to express it in dollars per kilowatt month. And that's how we got to the $631 per kilowatt month that you see in the tariff today. So if we can, so now I guess one question may come up, of course, which is kind of like, well, is a gas-fired resource still a relevant resource to be looking at? Because as Abdul mentioned, the whole idea with the soft offer cap calculation is to reflect the going forward fixed costs of a resource that is considered the marginal resource for the system. So one question might be, well, what is the marginal resource? What does that mean? And you might think that maybe the marginal resource is the resource technology type that is being built today on the grid. That is I think a reasonable way to think about what the marginal resource is. So you might consider solar plus storage to be the marginal resource type. Another way to think about it, though, would be, well, what resources are actually being designated for CPMs? And so if we can go to the next slide, as I will show. So here's the last 4 years of CPM designations that the ISO has made. And you can see that the majority of these CPM designations over the last 4 years have been to gas-fired resources. You can see those in the blue bars. You'll also, and that, by the way, if you sum that across the 4 years, that gets you to basically 2/3. So 2/3 of the volume of CPM designations have been to gas-fired resources. So I think there's still a very reasonable argument to be made that gas-fired resources are reflective of the appropriate technology type for deriving the soft offer cap. You can also see those storage represents the next largest component, and then other, mostly hydro and import. So that's a little bit of background on how to derive the soft offer cap per our tariff, and some additional justification here for why a gas-fired resource may continue to make sense. But let me just pause and see if there are reactions or questions.
We do have a question in the chat from David Francis, who's with BP Energy Company. Does the tariff require a flat level equal price for every month, or could the prices monthly vary to reflect relative capacity needs?
I'm not sure I understand that, but it's a levelized. And sorry, so it's David? Chat.
Yeah, David Francis. And okay, David, too, if you do want to jump on the line and clarify, you can click the raise hand icon.
Oh, I see what it, okay. I think, okay, he doesn't have, he's asking, yeah, so I think I understand where David's going. He's basically asking, yeah, so the soft offer cap applies to all CPM designation types and across all months. It's kind of one number. We derive it as described here, and then it gets applied across, irrespective of the month that it's being used for. And so, I mean, it's a little bit blunt, a little bit of a blunt instrument in that sense. That's just that is the way it is. I'm not entirely sure of the history for why it's like that, but it's a little bit more straightforward. But yeah, I mean, David, does that kind of get to what you're asking? Okay, good. He said
yes. Well, that's all I see for questions right now.
Okay. Great. Well, yeah, so that's just some quick background on how to drive the soft offer cap and how we've done it in the past. And now to kind of give you some more concrete numbers, we've got Brian from the California Energy Commission. And Brian, thank you very much for joining today and for providing numbers for all of us. So I'll turn it over to Brian.
All right. Are you able to bring my presentation up?
Yes, let's see, it should be, there we go.
Perfect. All right, I'm Brian Neff from the California Energy Commission. Part of my duties there is running the cost of generation model. So I'm going to go over a quick history of it and how it's been used in helping set the CAISO's CPM soft-offer cap. Next slide, please. So briefly, cost of generation model is an Excel-based model that uses bottom-up assumptions and a cash flow analysis to estimate the levelized cost of utility scale power plants. So that's 20 megawatts and greater. The most recent models were 2014 and 2018. Those were published in 2015 and 2019 respectively. The link there leads to the latest report, which is associated with the 2019 publication, if anybody's interested in getting in depth in the details of it. Next slide, please. So in 2014, we helped conduct the analysis for the CAISO, including the insurance, ad valorem, and fixed O&M, as was covered earlier, and then the 20% adder. As previously specified as well, it's a merchant constructed mid-cost 550 cc with duct firing. And so we have the individual costs that came out of the model for that. So it totaled the going forward fixed cost of 6306, add the 20%, and you get a monthly cost for 631. Next slide, please. So the 2018 update, when we were going through this process, there were some other projects, some combined cycle projects that were going through the CEC siting process. So we updated the sizes in the model, specifically brought the combined cycle without duct firing from 500 to 640. And that also brought what we modeled as a combined cycle with duct firing up to a 700 megawatts, which is what the ISO then used when they reviewed this cost in 2019. So when we modeled those costs, the 700 megawatt capacity ended up being 5890 in 2018. So for a monthly cost of 589. At that time, the CAISO decided to retain the existing cap and not update. Next slide, please. So as of this process, there is no newer cost generation model available, but CAISO staff reached out and we were able to provide some updates to the model, minor updates, and provide some more in-depth analysis. Those updates include labor rates and inflation. As everybody knows, inflation's been a bigger topic lately. We also ran the model in the current start year, so bringing that up to date, which also increases the prices. Ran the model using the two technologies that are in there, the 700 megawatt combined cycle with duct firing and the 640 megawatt combined cycle without duct firing. And then also per the request, we modified the model to include a 550 cc with duct firing so it matches the CAISO tariff language. So in the table below, you see the three different technologies with those three sizes. Couple comments on the prices here. The fixed O&M costs in the model that's done on a per megawatt basis, which is why when you're varying the capacity, we don't see that change, while the insurance and ad valorem are calculated on a per project basis. So when you have a larger capacity project, that cost is divided across more megawatts. So it ends up being slightly smaller for the larger size projects. So what we have for the going forward fixed costs varies slightly, 7134 for the larger project, and then 7341 for the 550cc, which comes out on a monthly basis, 713 and 734 respectively. Yeah, that is my last slide. So I'm open to any questions.
We do have a question from Chris Devon on the line. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi there, this is Chris Devon with Customized Energy Solution. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Thanks, guys. I was just curious. I raised my hand before you got into the slide with the updated information here. So at first I was going to ask if you guys were planning to do an updated study. So then I'll just say, thank you guys for, providing this additional updated information with the, updated inflation and stuff like that. I think that's a good change here. But I would just be curious as to, if the CEC and CAISA had discussed doing a more robust update at all, and, perhaps getting into that discussion about using a different resource type, since I think, not a lot of new combined cycles are being built, and I think storage or like geothermal or other type of resources are probably more kind of on the margin at this point. So any discussion or thoughts on that that you might be able to share would be appreciated. Thanks.
Yeah, the cost generation model includes a lot of different resources. It has geothermal in there, it has solar. We don't have a storage resource in it modeled currently. There is a little bit of talk about going in and updating the model, or actually kind of revamping it, although there's nothing set yet as to doing that. And because of the process where the ISO is in their timeline, we decided to provide what we could at this time. As far as the other resources, I'll leave that to CB because I think that's going to be after my presentation, getting into some of that further discussion.
Chris, thanks. Yeah, thanks a lot for the comment. I think you're right in terms of new builds, but yeah, I guess just the other argument is just given the types of resources that are being designated for CPMs continue to be mostly gas fired. So I mean that's the argument, I guess, for sticking with gas and sticking with the types of numbers that Brian just provided.
Thank you, guys. Yeah, certainly understand the perspective. I guess I would just, also point out that I just would encourage maybe a little bit of consideration of maybe trying to add storage into the model sooner rather than later, just because if we wait now and then we do this review and it gets filed, then it's 2024, and then we go through another 4-year cycle, and then it's 2029, 2028, 2029 timeframe before we do that, and by then it might have shifted a little bit. So point well taken about the fact that we're CPMing gas right now, but maybe it'll be more ripe in the next cycle of this. But I'll wait and see if other stakeholders have thoughts on that sort of thing. So that's just my opinion on it at this point. But thank you guys for hearing me out.
Thank you, Chris. And I'll just add one other thing, Chris, just in case it's helpful. We did, at least last summer, we looked at the PUC avoided, the E3 avoided cost calculator, and they do have some figures in there for 4-hour storage. And if you just look at the fixed O&M component of those figures, I think it was like $9 per kilowatt year. So pretty low. Now that doesn't include insurance or ad valorem. But just to give you some idea, like the numbers for the going forward components of 4-hour fixed costs appear to be pretty low. So just in case that's helpful, it seems like the upfront capital costs are really what drive the storage. I haven't actually looked at the avoided cost calculator since last summer, so I don't know if there's something more up to date or if there's a better source out there for storage that would be interesting to look at if someone knows. And it looks like maybe Kathleen knows. Looks like she's next in line.
Hi, CB. It's Kathleen Colbert from Vistra, and thanks both you and Brian. I don't have the answer to the specific question, but it's worth looking. I agree, it's worth looking into. No, I was hopping on just I want to broaden the conversation a little bit and put more context around what we're talking about, especially in the light of this, because I don't disagree. While I haven't looked at the exact numbers, I will say, CB, what you just said seems consistent with my understanding of storage. And for those, Vistra owns a large 400 megawatt battery energy storage system. We're bringing 350 megawatts online shortly. So we have quite a lot of experience with developing new storage and then also operating it. I think we've been operating the first phase for at least 2 years now. So that the way you described it jives with me. But what I think is missing from this conversation, the context that's really important to make sure that we also note is that we're CP. So while the CAISO capacity procurement mechanism and competitive solicitation process is, I think, reasonably looking at a benchmark that is avoided cost or avoided cost rate, the soft offer cap of 631, or if it changes, is used in other processes. So while I agree with your assumption that for storage, the bulk of the cost is in the upfront capital expenses rather than kind of annual going forward costs, the challenge that storage developers are having, at least I'll speak on our own, but I'll broaden it, is that the 631 soft offer cap is being used in the central procurement entity processes and potentially other processes as the benchmark for forward multi-year contracts that can actually go and cover the lifetime. So 10, 15-year contracts that are used to then procure new resources. So in the CPUC's RA program, the central procurement entity is procuring new resources in addition to procuring resources to cover their going forward costs. And while I understand that this is not your issue necessarily, it is important to realize that the soft offer cap that you choose, you are putting your thumb on the forward procurement processes, right? So that choice is the benchmark used for new resources as well. So if we are saying in the forward processes, 631 is about right for that type of, for a new local resource, including storage, it's got to be, the question then becomes, how can the forward processes allow for new resources when that is the benchmark kind of being used for unreasonably high? And I think it's important that we struggle with that and keep that in mind as we have these conversations.
CB,
oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, go ahead. Yeah, thanks, Kathleen. I think it's really good context. And I think that's sort of part of why we were trying to keep the scope of this initiative limited in the tariff process. And we recognize that there's, a lot of interplay between, the CP, like changing our CPM processes and the purpose of it. And that, for lack of a better term, a comprehensive look would really need to be done if we were going to make sort of larger changes to our CPM processes. So we're not wanting to do something here that has sort of ripple effects, in terms of impacts to, the contracting processes and or to, there's a lot people get feedback on like performance incentives and substitution obligations, via array. And so, yeah, I think we're certainly wanting to keep our eye on that in terms of any changes we made here. We kind of recognize the fact that almost all those other topics will need to be considered sort of comprehensively in future reforms that we make. So yeah, thanks Kathleen. It's really helpful feedback.
Yeah, of course. And if I can put a finer point on it, the context I'm I'm putting forward on the table is because you mentioned there's a couple ways that you could look at what the marginal resource should be. One of them would be, what is your marginal new resource? And one would be, what is your marginal resource you're procuring through the CPM? And I think you've acknowledged that arguments can be made to support either approach. So I'm sharing with you a very strong argument that we will likely make in written comments, that the right approach for this effort would be using a marginal resource based on new resources, because to be honest, the more impactful, the CPM soft offer cap has a larger impact on new processes than it does on the CPM process, the competitive solicitation process. As you know, the goal in the program holistically across all these agencies is to minimize backstop procurement. So ideally, we're only getting an A+ on our report card if there's no CPM, competitive solicitation process designations, right? And so I think it is important to keep in mind that there are strong arguments for the other option you laid out, and it's helpful for the whole group to understand those. Thank you.
Can I just ask, Kathleen, can I just ask one question, because maybe this is my own ignorance, but I didn't think the CPE was signing full-blown PPAs. I thought they were just procuring RA.
Kathleen, you might have to raise your hand again in order to get access to audio.
Hi, sorry, CB, I muted myself. That is not correct. The CPE and frankly the SDG&E, any of the load serving entities, I believe, but I know for certain CPE rules can have longer than 5-year terms. I believe 10 or 15 years probably more reasonable than a 20 or longer term that would be considered. But yes, they absolutely do have the ability to sign long-term RA agreements, and they that's absolutely a part of their scope.
Sorry, long-term RA, yeah, but I guess I'm not talking about the term. I'm talking about the products that are being procured. You're saying my impression was that the CPA was still just buying the capacity component, and mostly for existing resources. But I guess that what you're bringing is interesting, because you're saying these are actually being used as a substitute for a full-blown PPA that would actually get a resource built.
I think that a full-blown PPA is not necessary. I mean, full-blown PPAs are what I would call a tolling agreement that includes all attributes, are much less common. So if you're tracking the RA reform, they mentioned that is one of the reasons that they wanted to do an RA reform. And we should probably take this offline, but long-term RA agreements are a much more common mechanism, and they're equivalent to a PPA in the world of like interconnection. So when a CAISO wants you to confirm if you have a PPA, a long-term RA agreement is an equivalent of that. And so I think there's just a misunderstanding that the long-term RA is not the same function for development. And the way the CAISO's market plays into that is really important. We can talk about that in an offline conversation.
Okay.
But yes, it is new resources. And I think the other thing that you may not be tracking is that the difference is, are you looking to develop in a local sub area or not? Drives you into your processes.
Okay, yeah, I would love, if you don't mind, I would love to follow up later. That would be great.
Yep, happy to.
Cool, thank you.
And it looks like we have a question from Noah Tang.
Hi, this is Noah Tang from Middle River Power. Can you hear me? Great. I think the first question is to Brian from the CEC. I'm just wondering on the new cost estimates, those are not going or from a new study or a draft study, right? It's just sort of simply something done for today's meeting?
Yes, it was going into the model and doing some minor updates to it for this process. It's not from an entirely new study. No.
So this, your, I guess, results, or these results aren't going to be published in some study later this year.
No, we were not planning on doing an individual study.
Got it. So now, okay. So CV, I'm now kind of wondering whether or not we're in sort of a different section of the tariff where the ISO has to administer and start a commission a study.
So I think, no, I think the idea is to use these results as a basis for considering whether to update the soft offer cap. That's what we're saying. And we were kind of going to get there, but that's kind of the punchline, is we are taking these results that Brian has produced, sharing them with you here, and saying this is a potential basis for updating the soft offer cap.
Yeah, maybe I guess in my mind, I'm not sure I would consider this a commissioned study, full-blown study for cost of CPM soft offer cap.
So I think, no, one thing that would be helpful is to maybe get a little bit more detailed about why not, because I think we're talking about a pretty mature technology type here and Brian has updated figures. So I guess do you mind explaining what's your actual concern, I guess?
Yeah. So I mean, it sounds, looking at the slide a couple of slides ago, and I apologize,
yeah,
I don't remember them off the top of my head, but these seem to they're from sort of data from 2018 updated for things, but not an official study that the CEC has similarly done in the past. From what I understand, it was like somebody from the CEC calls a bunch of developers and so on and ask what those going forward costs are for new development and such. This is sort of recognizing that there has been no new information. I wonder whether or not this is the appropriate approach for considering 2023 updates to CPM soft offer cap, and also given that potentially you do see while you say significant, probably more than 50, slightly more than 50% of the CPMs in 2021. Was it? I don't have the slide.
Yeah.
In front of me, but you still see a good chunk of this from storage as well as other. My guess, other is imports, right? So
yeah.
Okay.
So in that, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. So in that sense, like I wonder whether or not we're focusing on the right reference resource.
So no, I think you had a couple things there. Maybe actually, Saz, do you mind going back? Let's see. Maybe we can go. Let's just go back one slide, so at least we can have Brian's numbers up in front of us. That would be great. Okay. Awesome. So yeah, no, so in terms of the recent CPM designations, it was like 66% were gas fired. Then there's the next chunk was storage, and then there's the other component. You're right, was mostly imports and hydro. But still, the majority was gas fired, and that's kind of. But again, there could be an argument. There could be an argument that the marginal resource should be more reflective of what's being built. I guess you could argue that way too. But if for a moment you take the argument that the gas-fired resource is the appropriate resource, if you take that for a moment as an assumption. This methodology here, what Brian has done is, and Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, but you've followed basically the tariff-defined methodology for updating the fixed cost the way you did 4 years ago, right? I mean, it's pretty similar process that you went through 4 years ago. Is that, or Brian, am I missing something? Maybe you can provide a little bit of color.
Sure. Yeah, 4 years ago, I guess so the 2018, 2019 update did go a little bit more in depth as far as the scope of all the updates to the model. There wasn't, I think, updating these two, labor inflation, specifically the start year as well. These are some of the bigger drivers of the fixed O&M of these going forward fixed costs. And these projects, they were going through the permitting process at the time, and they ended up coming online in 2021. So they are fairly current. We view these as, modern technologies. We don't see them changing in price very much because they are mature technologies. As opposed to, say, energy storage or offshore wind, where we do expect some significant price changes in the upcoming years.
Thanks, Brian. So maybe just to channel Noah for 1 second here. No, I'm just trying to help. I'm trying to help get to a little bit more to the root. What was looked at, I guess, maybe Brian, in 2018 that's maybe not in that we didn't look at this time, or that you didn't look at this time, and you're saying that it was maybe not as big of a driver. Is that correct? Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, I focused on what would affect these specific costs. So I wasn't going in to say what are the costs of natural gas and updating those, or what is emission costs. There's a lot of upfront costs and other costs that would go into the full levelized cost of this technology, and go into those capital costs to estimate the levelized cost, but that wasn't needed for this. This was just, okay, what are this going forward fixed costs and what really affects those prices?
Thank you, Brian. Noah, does that help? Does that alleviate your concern?
I mean, given that the study doesn't include, sort of the energy storage and things that are being built today, maybe the bigger issue that I have is similar to what Chris had, was are we focused on the right technology to be basing our costs on? And maybe that's the first threshold question. And then the second is, if we don't have that, should we be sort of under the tariff? The CEC hasn't posted, 46 months of a draft study. The ISO would commission its own study. And I think we should think about looking at that, particularly for things like energy storage, those types of technologies.
CB, if I may, really quick, I think you're making good points. I think the intent in this initiative, this phase, is just to strictly go by the tariff, which we have to, the tariff is clear that we have to use the CEC study. So to your point, is the CEC study is the right thing to keep using, or is there changes needed to that study, the criteria, or are there other kind of types of that we need to use? I think all these questions that you asked and the folks before you, these are all good questions. I think, as Partha indicated at the beginning, and I think we're going to reemphasize at the end, I think the intent is to keep the scope of this initiative pretty limited to reevaluating the soft offer cap based on current rules, and then perhaps a few initiatives there we reevaluate, reassess the soft offer and CPM, maybe more CPM assessment, and even like, you know, someone asked about the seasonality, someone asked about the type of resource we use. I think these are all the questions you asked. They're all good questions, but I think the intent here is to kind of postpone addressing those until we get to that phase of the, hopefully a CPM enhancement type project.
Wait, I thought we were in a CPM enhancement project.
I mean, a more comprehensive one. I think this one is limited to evaluating the soft offer cap.
Okay, so I think I will agree to disagree on the use of the CEC study. That is, I think, within one portion if the CEC has updated its draft study within the last 46 months. However, if that has not happened, the tariff clearly states that the ISO can administer or commission its own study. And so I'm just simply wondering whether or not we're actually on that path of the tariff already. Anyways, I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Thanks. No, I mean, it's possible that maybe I'm missing something here, but my interpretation is that this is an update, specifically an update for the components that are required to calculate the soft offer cap, as opposed to producing a bunch of other maybe helpful information that is not needed to calculate the soft offer cap. Brian has focused on specifically the variables that are needed to derive the soft offer cap. But okay, maybe we can go to the next question.
Yeah, we have a question from Matthew Barmack.
Yeah, hey, this is Matt Barmack with Calpine. Can you hear me?
Matt.
Hey, how's it going? In light of Abdul's, you know, the comment that Abdul just made, this is probably out of scope, but you know, it just seems like in the current environment, at least, you know, there's a pretty strong case that kind of the marginal capacity resource is actually an import that may be more expensive than the going forward cost of an existing gas unit. And even for existing gas units, you know, there's an opportunity cost. I mean, those resources have opportunities outside of California or outside of the CAISO. And so I guess I just wonder if you kind of maintain the current approach, do you worry about actually being able to attract the capacity that you need through CPM?
No, that's fair feedback, Matt. And we've heard this from a number of parties have reached out to us with sort of that same perspective. And I certainly think that type of topic would be sort of a part of the scope. And I think this kind of overlaps with sort of a lot of the themes that Neil and Kathleen sort of raised. There's probably a variety of people here with different perspectives on sort of what the purpose of the soft offer cap and was trying to achieve, whether it's trying to basically mitigate market power, retain existing resources, or if it's sort of trying to drive new procurement incentives. So we would certainly look for your comments around that. I think your feedback is yes, really really appreciate it, Matt. I think it's a comment that we're certainly going to be to get more feedback on sort of those broader changes in the future. Yeah, thanks.
All right, we have a question from Todd Ryan.
Hey, Todd Ryan from Pacific Gas and Electric. TV, nice to talk to you. Long time no speak. Partha, nice to see you again. Hey, Partha, when we were working on this issue, 2018-19, at the time, no one had ever filed at FERC for cost justification above the soft offer cap. Have you seen that change?
I'll defer to David and Abdul on sort of on the number that we've seen. Dave's
I don't think I've seen. I don't know if David, you've seen it, but I haven't seen any files that we received FERC approvals that we got. I'm not sure if people filed, but I don't know if we would know, but we would know that FERC approval happened because we would have to honor that price, and I haven't seen one.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I understand and respect the opinions of those representing generators, but I mean, it seems counterintuitive that if no one's yet justified that they're going toward fixed costs or above the soft offer cap, that we would need to drastically alter the formula. So, I mean, my inclination, my personal opinion is that this seems like a valid update, what you guys have done. And, but if we were going to go down the route of doing a comprehensive change to the modeling, we might need to also take into account the fact that the FERC standard is a reasonable opportunity of recovering their fixed costs, which means one needs to take into account revenues from energy and ancillary services as well. So if we're going to open up the door to new studies and new modeling, I would kindly request that we also consider energy and ancillary service revenues. So thank you. I really appreciate the presentation today.
And we do have a question from Kathleen Colbert.
Yeah, thanks. This is Kathleen Colbert from Vistra. I want to elevate this conversation up from what may be 10,000 feet or 30,000 feet to 100,000 feet in the sky. I heard you try to say that there is a scope to this discussion. I understand that there's a scope to the discussion and that you are proposing a scope. And we will have a chance to provide comments on that scope. But I want to share that Vistra is very disappointed that you released a straw proposal instead of having an issue paper for us to discuss that scope. The way that this initiative was built was how exactly, I understood exactly the way that Noah referred to it. This track is the comprehensive CPM enhancement. So there is no future project to do that I think, Abdul, you alluded to. This was the project that was promised. This is the track that was promised for this. So unless you're saying that there is a third track that is on the schedule, this is it. And so as a part of that, we need to have a chance to talk about that scope. After you separated out the tracks, track 1 and track 2 last iteration, define this as the comprehensive track, we've taken a lot of time to think about what that scope needs to be. We've identified somewhere between 5 to 7 items that we intended to propose and kind of talk through as problems to be discussed with potential solutions. I'm not saying we have solutions, but we have identified more than one issue with CPM, and we have discussed that with CAISO, right? So I know that we've brought those issues to you, and at a minimum, from a process perspective, we did think we would have a chance to have an issue paper, opportunity to comment on it, get stakeholders to share it with stakeholders and not just the CAISO. So to see if stakeholders similarly felt that these were issues worth taking up, and then get to a refined scope that was based on stakeholder input. Our written comments will reflect this, but I want to be clear, there is no agreed upon scope for the comprehensive CPM enhancements initiative. I'm happy you've picked one item and you're proposing an option for it. This can be a part of the scope, but we need to have a scope discussion and we need to start there.
Thanks, Kathleen. Maybe I'll just try to reiterate and clarify my previous comments. To me, if we look at the stakeholder catalog and the roadmap for the ISO, we have sort of a number of different tracks, including our enhancements as well as the CPM track. And I view that we're going to have to take a variety of, we're going to have to explore changes to resource adequacy, coverage in a manner. Also going to be sort of a look at, as I indicated before, a slice a day and sort of having a workshop to make sure our programs, are sort of can continue to work, particularly until those larger changes can be made with the PUC reforms. And so there's a variety of changes and opportunities we're going to have to the CPM. This is not going to be the final crack at sort of looking at CAISO's backstop processes and sort of the interactive effect on sort of various other various other things, including the dual, alluded to RAIM, and I'm sure we're going to get sort of feedbacks as well and sort of what the impacts are to the market. So yeah, I think I'm just more indicating that this was really sort of narrowly focused at those tariff requirements, which CB discussed before, in terms of what our tariff obligations are right now to look at the CPM soft offer cap. But totally understand your point, Captain. But this is, it sounds like you have more to say.
Yeah, well, if there's not going to be an opportunity afforded, can I have the time to share the scope that we asked the CAISO to include with stakeholders?
Yeah, absolutely. You're welcome to share that. I'm just more alluding to the fact that this won't be your last time to make that comment. But yeah, please go ahead.
Okay, that would be really helpful for transparency. So we brought several issues forward, and Todd mentioned the ability to file at the FERC filing. So one of the issues that we have identified and brought to the group is that what is eligible to be included in the FERC filing is overly restrictive, and the process is overly burdensome, which is why we think that the amount of filings that you may have seen are maybe lower than you would otherwise seen if the rules were better tuned to commercial reality. One of the things that we'd like to discuss is including some reasonable concept of an opportunity cost that we would have to support and defend, and that FERC would review under its own authority. So something balanced, very reasonable, but that issue is a real issue, which is why we're seeing certain actions being taken, and that's one of the scope items that we proposed to you. Another issue that we brought forward, we've already talked a lot about what's the right technology type. So thank you for including that in scope. The third issue would have been differentiating between new and existing, and kind of having a concept of how a new versus an existing cap would be applied, but we've already talked about that too. The third one is a really important one, which is that the annual competitive solicitation process versus the monthly competitive solicitation process probably shouldn't be using the same cap. And the reason for that is the length of the contract associated with it. When you look at an annual profile, the cost associated with a year is very different than the cost associated with a month. For this reason, we have brought to you a very principled, narrow request to include in scope the caps that should be applied to the different granularities of the competitive solicitation processes. And we see that as very much so in scope of this initiative. Again, I mentioned that maybe there's like the last item I think we brought to you was this idea of really digging into opportunity cost, bilateral opportunity cost, reflecting the opportunity cost of offering it into the CPM versus into other markets. I know that's a stickier issue. It's definitely one that requires lots of policy discussions, but it is something that could be included in the FERC filing above the soft offer cap, and have generators go and support it, generators and storage or whatever you want to include, go to support it at FERC. We spent a lot of time internally coming up with this list, thinking through it, doing analytics, and providing it to the CAISO. And I appreciate the time to really share that we've identified these issues with the stakeholder body, and that we had understood that we would at least have a chance to propose these scope to be included in this initiative. And so I appreciate the time, Partha. I am skeptical it will get any light outside of this call again. So if you can create a clear path for where these issues will be taken up, then I can get more comfortable. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah, and I certainly would appreciate your including those in the comments. There's obviously a whole lot of substance to that, and particularly sort of which ones you feel like should be sort of scoped into this initiative versus sort of a larger, more comprehensive, comprehensive changes. Yeah, that type of feedback would be really, really helpful. So yeah, thanks, Kathleen.
Yeah, of course. And just as a personal note, I really value transparency. So thank you for the time and allowing this to be brought into the stakeholder space. Thank you.
All right, well, I think that's all we have for questions at this time. Brian, I think you wrapped up your presentation. Was there anything else you wanted to add?
No, that's all for me. Thank you.
Then I'll hand it back over to CB.
Okay. Thank you. And thanks again, Brian, for sharing your numbers. Super helpful. So we will go to the next section here. If you don't mind, Silas, go to the next slide here. Okay, well, this is a pretty straightforward slide. And we kind of just discussed this a little bit. What is in scope and out of scope, and it's. I just also want to reiterate what Partha was saying, which is we absolutely value very much like the ideas that have been brought forth, not only from all of you, but we have ideas as well internally of how to improve things. But there are some practical constraints on the implementation side that we have to take into account. And so it's really more of a timeline thing. It's not that we don't want to make other improvements. It's more of just the timing. So with that being said, what we're proposing here to be in scope for this initiative is to do a straightforward update to the soft offer cap based on the tariff-defined methodology, which is to take 120% of the levelized going forward fixed costs of the combined cycle unit, as Brian shared. And then what would be out of scope are these other important ideas that Kathleen just talked about, others have brought up for 2024 and beyond. Or do you want to add anything to that?
Nope, I think you covered it well.
Okay. I think we've just, I don't really have, let's see, what's the next slide here? If there's any questions. Okay, so then the schedule. Yeah, so Kathleen, maybe I can just take one more second to address what you were saying, which is if you look at the schedule here, the reason we're jumping straight to a straw proposal is because of the limited nature of the scope of this initiative. It's pretty straightforward as proposed, and therefore it makes sense to go to a straw proposal if the scope is going to be limited as we've proposed it. So with this schedule, we would ask for comments on this meeting here on June 1st, and then we would publish a straw proposal at the end of June, and then go forward from there. Most likely targeting a January 2024 board meeting. Oh, looks like we've got a question from Chris.
Yeah, thanks, CB. That's Chris Devin with Customized Energy Solutions again. Just kind of curious just to feel out the willingness to kind of reopen the whole cap again when you go through that other, additional process that would be, later on and beyond into 2024. I guess I can totally understand that you guys are kind of on track and need to schedule to move along. Got a clip here to, get your tariff requirements done and not have to get a waiver, those sort of things. So certainly understand the, process here, but I guess it would be nice if maybe CAISO would just put in writing that you guys would be willing to, revisit that again if you, go down the path of, actually updating the approach to consider some of these more robust, nuanced ideas that have been raised here. I think that would probably give people, some good feeling about it, not having to wait for another 4-year cycle or whatever. So just a thought there, for consideration. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chris. And just to maybe I'm more giving a preview, but at least from my end, I really want to make sure that we're, when we look at things comprehensively. I really want to make sure that we, ahead of solutions, are really sort of honing in on sort of what are our goals, what are the current problem statements, what are some of the trade-offs in terms of the things we're facing, and then, like, for lack of a better term, from there, when we really have a good understanding of that, we looked at data, we looked at information, then we can start really scoping out what the solutions look like. And that, I don't think that we're trying to take things off the table in terms of that solution. So, yeah, I really appreciate that feedback, Chris. That's yeah, quite helpful.
I think Chris put his hand back up. Is that right, Chris?
Yeah, sorry, thanks. I just muted myself and then couldn't unmute myself again. But I appreciate that part, though. Thank you. I got to remember not to mute myself if I want to respond. But thank you for the response. That's helpful. And you know, I'm definitely looking forward to, you know, hearing about the schedule for like RA enhancements, more comprehensive stuff at some point. But you know, that can obviously wait until you guys are ready to roll that out too. But yeah, that's obviously something that everybody's kind of keenly wanting to think about with all the slice of day stuff coming in, and you know, other things like these more comprehensive reviews of other stuff, and maybe developing UCAP and other things. But that's all for that time frame. So you know, I'm definitely you know, excited to hear when you guys plan to actually kick that off. But I can wait until you guys are, you know, formally able to announce that. So that would be my only other feedback. But thank you very much for the response there, Partha. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you, Chris.
That's all I see for questions. We did get a comment in the chat about today's slide deck that is posted on the initiative webpage, so I dropped the link there in the chat.
Thanks, Caitlin. Turn it back to you then, I think, to wrap this up.
All right, so I'll wrap it up with next steps. Thanks everybody for your participation today. We did move through the agenda quickly. So we will be posting a comment template no later than tomorrow. You will have until June 1st to submit your comments, and there on the slide is the link to access the comment template. And again, a little overview of the upcoming milestones. Due June 1st, straw proposal will be published June 30th, and then we'll have a follow-up call to discuss the straw proposal on July 10th. Next slide, please. And then all of the materials related to CPM are CPM enhancements are on that initiative webpage again. And if you have any issues using the comment template or have any questions, you can send those questions to ISO stakeholder affairs@CAISO.com. And again, thank you so much for your participation today. Thank you to our panelists and special guest Brian today. Have a great rest of your afternoon.
That concludes today's conference. Thank you for using Event Services. You may now disconnect.